now.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, no matter where you are in this big, strange world we live in. Welcome to episode 8 of Mixing Mondays, I believe. Yes, it is 8. And today's topic, we are going to be talking about mentorship and mentoring. So either people who have mentored us, and at the later half, on a bigger topic that will kind of segue back to previous ones we've done, how to mentor the next generation or our contemporaries. So we can start, and with as all Mixing Mondays, these are going to be released on YouTube. So if there's a name you wish to not mention, go ahead with that. But with these, we have a general topic we like to talk about, but if you feel like going down a rabbit hole or on a tangent, go right ahead. There's no real time limit. It's only as much as you want to stay here. So with that little housekeeping out of the way, we all know the normal, keep yourself muted and background noise and all that stuff. So let's get started with the fun part of what we're all talking about is, people who have mentored us and we feel have either made a really good positive aspect on us or negative or just fun stories in between. So anyone want to start with maybe their story of a mentor that has helped them?
I think you should go first, Scott.
All right.
I think it's one thing that I don't know about where you've come from.
Okay, so I will start then with so I kind of have an advantage already on this topic because for those of you who don't know, I am a member of Ep8, which is the American and Canadian Stagehand Union. So in order in the process, and pretty much everyone that I know of, you have to have a person be your sponsor. And so already there's a mentorship kind of built into that. My mentor, who I would want to talk the most about, is a man named Todd Hendricks. There's a few reasons why I picked him as my sponsor. One, he just kind of melded with me very well. For those in my local, I have a very weird personality compared to everyone else. Here, everyone's like, oh, it's Scott, but it's like much of people in my local. So first of all, I needed a sponsor who even like me. So Todd was that, but I picked him for that, but also he is one of the few people whose mixing ability I admired. Like he got the sound I wanted. Like he was mixing, like the moment I realized it was, there's one of the venues I work at is a college and they have, their version of American Idol where the college kids get to compete and the top ones have this big performance. And it's a huge band where it's like it has, a rhythm section, it has a string section, it has playback, it has a gospel choir, and the board being used is the Midas Pro 2. We max out the inputs on it. So that's a lot to take care of first. But during rehearsals, I just heard the sound, I was like, this is the sound I want to produce as well. So already knowing, not even genre-wise, but just like the skill-wise, I'm like, this is what I want to do. It felt natural, it wasn't loud, but I could still hear everything. And so it's just like, okay, this is someone I want to mentor, be my mentor. And what was funny, I'd asked him at the end of one show, and he's like, no one's ever asked me. And I was just kind of surprised. I'm like, wow, someone of your skill, no one's ever asked you to be their sponsor. But he had helped me a lot too of learning things that still I needed to learn on the job of like, when you need to ask questions, but then just look and see what information you already have. Do you need to ask more? Like a perfect example, he said when we were doing the setup for the Idol show, he said you kept asking questions about where to input stuff, but everyone on the crew already had an input sheet. So knowing that information, and next time I did one of those, instead of asking a million questions, I just asked, hey, cool, if I do the drums? They're like, sure, and boom, got right at it. And just someone that I could discuss because he definitely saw bits of himself in me. So, and we just like after one show, after we had all packed up, he and I just talked for a good hour. And the other thing I admired about Todd too was he was a great mixer, but he also was someone who saw a niche that needed to be filled. And it wasn't he created something new. I should remember the name of the pack stuff. He had made these wireless packs, because we're all familiar with the packs that like if you have someone who like an actor or actress or the pop style singer and they got to wear that bell pack, a lot of them aren't that really good, they don't look good, and there's a whole bunch of challenges. What he did is basically he did what's called make a better widget. So he just through years and years and made these, and what he said is one year when they finally got off the ground, the Broadway production of Hamilton called up his company saying, yo, we need 48 packs. Can you sell them? And I was just like, okay. And he's just also made, and another show we were doing during the setup, we all know for RF packs, whether, you know, we've always used the shoe, you know, the thing you can hang your shoes in. And I saw him had a version of that for the RF packs. And I'm like, I jokingly said, oh, is that a new one you're working on? He's like, oh yeah, actually it is. It's in the prototype. And it's another thing of just that idea of like, there's still things in our industry that can be improved. And just another time too, like a recent show, it was a political gig, and in between we just went out for lunch and just were chit-chatting and like, no, just learning from him, and just someone who was like, if I asked him questions on stuff, and being able to just like talk with someone who speaks your language on stuff more than just, oh, you know, here's the gear, but it's just like you can tell that they mesh with you and definitely want to help you be better is a rare thing to find. So no, that kind of was in weird directions, but this kind of, that helped me in, at least in my years of developing as a budding stagehand, was just Todd giving me those pieces of advice to learn and think about.
That's so cool. And do you still see him?
I email him from time to time. It's obviously he lives in New Hampshire right now, so being able to see him, but like that political gig was, I can timestamp it. It was when Elizabeth Warren, it was actually her, that was an Elizabeth Warren one. It was like in the dead of winter, so I probably put it around like December or February-ish. And just, it's more I haven't bothered to email just because we've all been busy with other stuff. But he's been thinking, I'm like, maybe I should just give him a call and see what he's up to.
So the IATSE, you say it's called?
Yeah. Yep, IATSE, the International Stage, I always forget the acronym and I should know it. It's the International Stage Technicians. Yep, that's how it's spelled. Yep, IASTE. Okay. It's basically, you ever get to the end of the movie and it has that little propeller logo? Yeah. That's IATSE.
Oh, cool. So you need a sponsor to get in this.
Right. You need a sponsor. Well, so at least in mine, there's two levels. There's apprentice and journeyman. Others have either you're in or you're not, or you're just an overhire. But as I'm currently an apprentice, but in order to be sworn in as an apprentice, you need to have a sponsor. And these are two people who, you know, are basically vouching for you and saying, yes, this person has skills to be able to get in.
Okay. You were particularly fortunate to find someone then that kind of gelled with you on a personality level. I imagine it's probably not that straightforward for a lot of people. Elliot, how did you get into working in live events? Did you go through any kind of sort of grassroots training, or did you just start in a venue? I can't remember whether we've ever spoke about this in the past.
There's a very long version of this story, and I'll try and do the short version. I'm a musician to start with, so I went to music college and then university. I know college is university in the US, but there's kind of like 16 to 18 is college, and then 18 to 21 is then your degree at university. So college was where I'm from on the Isle of Wight, which has a whole musical heritage. And then university was Newcastle, where I stayed. So basically I was going to be a rock star, obviously. And then that led to, you know, being in a band that wasn't really getting gigs. And like you said, before we actually started recording, Liam, we were talking about, you know, we've solved problems. That's what we do as engineers. So if the band's not getting gigs, you start promoting gigs. And then I'm like, oh, maybe we're not the best band in this city. And maybe I need to start promoting the good bands. And then, oh, okay, maybe I'll be a promoter. And then you end up losing loads of money. You look around the room and you go, well, the bar staff are getting paid and that guy behind the mixing desk is getting paid. I kind of knew enough to start doing some of my own mixing. So that's kind of how I got into it, was bought a PA system and did my own sound. And then that led to people going, hey, you're good at this. Can you do my party? Can you do my wedding? That sort of thing. And then I then started a company that is that end of the sort of industry. And now I'm at the point where, as a freelancer, I'm doing all sorts of interesting stuff in body fields, and
So you didn't have a mentor as such then?
Well,
You didn't
it's
have
funny
that
because I
environment?
had during college, back on the Isle of Wight, I had a few people who I was just I was almost thrust into doing sound, but other people must have seen an interest in it, in me, that I didn't see, because it was always people going like, oh yeah, Elliot will do the sound, Elliot will do this, Elliot will do that. So I did my first monitor gig when I was like 16 in a venue. There's about 800 capacity. There's a guy called Ian Davison actually who ran like the local music shop and was the sound guy. It's a very, very small place that I'm from, so he's kind of the sound guy. And there were a couple of others, but he was like the main guy that took me under his wing. And then I went to uni, and that was doing music performance. So there was a little bit of recording and a little bit of this and that, but not really anything focused. And then I had kind of business mentors when I started the business, who were studio guys, kind of electronic music producers, that sort of thing. So I've always kind of picked brains of various people and gone, how can I apply this to what I'm doing? And it wasn't until I got my house gig that I kind of met somebody who was literally doing the thing that I was trying to do, which was mix bands live on stage as a monitor engineer or as a front of house engineer. And we've just been kind of Facebook conversation constantly for the last 6 years, which was really cool because, it started out as like, oh, what was this, who's Bob McCarthy that you keep talking about? And what does he do, and what system design? Because I just kind of plug my speakers into my desk and that's all I do. And now we're kind of talking on the same sort of level, obviously, that we're all chatting, and I've sort of brought myself up to be able to have kind of pro conversations with her. And then again, every house engineer that I work with, every touring engineer, and at the moment anybody who'll answer my emails, that I'm kind of interested in, I'm kind of picking their brains on particular things that I think they do well. So I have had mentors, but it's all been very informal. I don't think I've ever actually approached somebody and said, like, please will you wear this badge that says Elliot's mentor on it?
Yeah, that's kind of the feeling that I had coming into this conversation. I started working in my local theatre. I started as bar staff. I've gone through the story before, but we'll quickly go through it again. Started as bar staff. Got dragged backstage by the then technical manager, a woman called Hazel, who at the time, I was under the impression that she knew everything there was to know backstage. She always came across as quite an angry person. And she kind of proved that about herself in the way that she lost her job. She had a pretty big battle with the management. Shortly after that, her role was taken over by a guy called Terry, and it was at the point when Terry came in that I kind of immediately got more of a feeling that Hazel hadn't actually known as much as I'd thought she had. Terry seemed a lot more knowledgeable. He'd been the tech manager of that venue before. He'd started off as on a youth training scheme when he was 19 in the venue, and had kind of taught himself from magazines and whatever you could get your hands on back then. There was no YouTube, there was no Google, and it was kind of Terry that taught me up until the point where he left. He didn't stay as technical manager at that point for a very long time because he was also running his own company at the same time, and his company was kind of getting really busy, and it got to be too much to do both. But in the short time that he was there, he was by no means any kind of official mentor, but certainly, like, looking back on working in the theatre, he was the person, maybe more even than teaching me about audio, was the person who got me interested in it. It wasn't really until after he'd left that I kind of got stuck into YouTube and Googling everything I could, because he'd gone and I needed to know it at that point. While he was there, I was primarily just doing lights. I was a lighting tech for a couple of years. So yeah, I mean, he left, and then I kind of taught myself as much as I could for a few years, and I didn't really need an awful lot of audio knowledge. We were a receiving house, so more or less every show that came in had their own sound engineer. As long as I knew enough to be able to run some cables, to be able to tip the right case, kind of know a BNC from an XLR, and not run things back to front, I could kind of get by. But yeah, that was kind of my introduction. I didn't necessarily have a mentor as such. I'm not sure what the union situation, like the differences in union situations between the US and the UK. I know down in the West End things are a lot more unionized, but up here in the Wild West of the Northeast, ironically enough, you kind of from my experience anyway, you kind of just start working in a venue, you do the job and you go home, and you just hope no one realizes that the building's on fire until after you've left. So it's interesting to hear people like Scott talk about sponsors for unions and things like that. Do either of there's three now. Do any of the other guys have any kind of memories of who it was that got them, even if it wasn't someone maybe that brought them all the way through learning everything, maybe someone who got them interested in audio? Does anyone have anyone in mind like that?
I can jump in on this one.
Seth's got someone.
So I started doing the live audio thing because I was in school.
Seth, you're barely audible.
Oh, here, I think I know why. Hang on. Is that better?
Much better.
All right, I'm gonna switch it from this random microphone here to my MacBook.
Okay.
It's just easier. Yeah, one sec. Sorry.
Well, and while Seth's doing that, just to give you a little thing, Liam, in America too, like, yeah, I mentioned IoT, but like, there's tons of freelancer stuff too. It's just certain, like, it's one of those, it depends like where you go. Like some cities, like you go to New York and you're in New York City Broadway, there's everything's there union, but you go off Broadway or even a little further out there, there's still unions, but there's a whole lot of non-union houses. So it's more
fairly similar then.
Yeah.
Is this any better?
That's much better, Seth.
Okay. So I started out in college as a music business major because I didn't know what else I wanted to do, and I hadn't done any production audio stuff before that. It was my spring of my freshman year that I started working part-time at the theater on campus, and that's when I just got sucked in. At first it was just stagehand stuff, but really like some of the mentors there that got me started. The guy that ran the thing, he was technically a part of the university staff. And then the older guys who were, the juniors and seniors running sound, who kind of took on this leadership role. So, the guy who ran it, his name is Frank Baird. He teaches here at in Nashville, Tennessee right now. But he was with Claire Brothers for the longest time, so he brought a lot of experience in. But since he was running office production management stuff, these guys who we worked with, just these older students, were a huge part of, mentoring, sure, but like just getting me hooked into the idea of doing it. Cause it was one of those deals where I was so new to it, and I was, freshman, 18, 19 years old, and seeing these guys who were just a couple years older, but seemed to know so much more, and just seeing their passion and the fact that like I could do that too in a year or two if I just, worked hard. I mean, as I went on in college and I, started working with vendors and doing more stuff like that experience and that knowledge came, and, I got to build my network of people in the real world, so to speak. But those guys, just those students, those fellow students, even though they may not have been professionals, they were instrumental in just getting me started and showing me, like, basically I just wanted to be like the big kids. That was that was what drove me to just like keep like learning. And it was a Yamaha PM1D, and like it was just this, relatively like dinky little theater. Actually, it wasn't that dinky. It was fine, but that was, they didn't teach me everything, and I've learned a lot more since then from either webinars or people who were considered professionals in the field. But those guys showed me more of an attitude thing and led by example of their passion for it than anything.
Interesting, Seth, because not to get too much on, but what you mentioned was before I got into live sound, I was going, where in my college, I was getting those, they called it MBI, so music business industry, probably similar to what you had.
Yep.
And I was going for studio stuff. But what was interesting, one of our teachers said, unless you somehow find an in Vermont, there's like no industry for recording. There's a few, because like most of the bands here either DIY it or they go like to the big ones. So at one point, I forget which teacher just told me, try and get some skill in live audio. So, and I then got some internships and stuff. But it was interesting too, because in that program, there was also, even though I was quote unquote older because it was my second degree, but there were still people like this that were senior to me that had been in there for a few more years. And like, knowing ideas like, okay, this is a really big field, even in recording, that I need to learn about. So it's just, I personally feel like this might go into the next part, but it's like, I wouldn't trade having a bit of a book knowledge in mind, because some people, yeah, having just, going out there and do that. But for me, being able to have that environment for those few years that had some structure to it, to at least know the basics. So when I got out there, I wasn't an absolute know nothing. Like I knew the basics. Like even when I walked up to a live console, I'm like, okay, I know gain structure. I know the basics of EQ. I know what compression does and all that, because it's like, okay, that's what was happening in Pro Tools. Now I have to see it in front of me. So it helped in that, just having that basic. So my little side note on that. But was there anything else, Seth, before you wanted to kind of say on that?
No, I mean, I just thought it was, everyone, there are a lot of good mentors out there, especially people since I've graduated and gotten to work with, people who I've look up to and try to read about, like Bob McCarthy and all those guys. But it was funny because without these, couple seniors in college who, little freshman me got to look up to, I probably wouldn't have had the interest to keep going in the field to meet those other guys. So it was good.
And just to kind of clarify a bit on the mentor, when I mean, it's like, it doesn't have to be someone like, you spent years with. It could be someone who just like one day, like you did a gig where you and them were working something and they imparted some knowledge, or it's just like you worked with them for a tour or so. So just so it doesn't have to be like where mine was, where it's like, someone who I see every day or something. So just to kind of clarify that. So anyone else gonna have like someone who they feel like fits that description of like someone who just helped you, even if it was just for one day?
We actually, Nathan and I were talking about this.
Is it me? It's me.
No, yeah.
Thank you. Go
We
ahead.
were talking about this before when we were recording for your podcast. I've had three mentors that were in my college times. One of them was when I was at university, and that was like my 4-year-long mentor, and he was amazing. And then at my school, I went for theater and film. You had to complete an internship as part of your degree program. And so I went to a theater in California. I'm based out of Florida now, to do my internship. And I had the worst mentor ever. I had a mentor that I don't know if we just didn't mesh well, although he was the one that hired me. Like he interviewed me and all of that and chose me for the internship, but we didn't work well together at all. And I actually, when I finished the internship, which I almost didn't, I almost just quit altogether. When I finished it, I came home and I'm like, well, great. I have one more semester of college and I hate this and I don't want to do live sound ever again. And so I took like 6 months. I think I still had to finish my fall shows that I'd already been booked for with the school. And then I took several months off before I started working again because of how much I hated that whole experience. And I think a lot of it might have been the person, my mentor, or maybe just the whole situation, but it sucked. And then I got a new mentor several months after that got me back into working live sound and theater. So that's my long
It's surprising how much of an impact people can have.
seriously,
Um,
I wasn't ready for it to be a negative experience, you know.
So what was it, do you think, that this third and final mentor provided that kind of swung you around? Because it must have been quite a difficult position. You know, they weren't coming from it as like a challenge or anything, I don't think. But even if you'd said to them straight up front, you need to fix how I feel about this industry, and if they'd known about it up front, that would have been quite a
Yes.
dot. Like
That
they
would
must
be
have done something pretty
strange.
special. Yeah, it would have been very strange.
That would be strange. No, a friend had suggested me for a job because we'd graduated a few months earlier, and I was like, all right, I'll give it another go. And she's like, you're gonna love this guy. He's really sweet. Blah blah blah. I'm like, okay. And we got along really well when I first met him, and he was made to be a mentor because he was caring, he was helpful, he didn't judge me for the gaps that I did have, because as you guys all probably know, even though you're finished with university doesn't mean that you know everything, and I still obviously am learning things now decades in, but he was just patient and kind, and that was really what I needed, because the guy from my internship was the opposite. He was really harsh and straightforward, and he just had a nasty attitude. Like, because I didn't go to the same school that he'd gone to, I couldn't possibly be good enough for doing this job anyway. And I just hated that attitude altogether, which is ironic for the university that I teach for, because a lot of our students come out with that kind of attitude. But this guy was just made to be a mentor. I don't think every person is meant to be a teacher, you know? And so if you realize it's not your thing, or you're not getting good results out of your students or your mentees, then I don't know, maybe it's not for you. I strongly feel that, because I had this was a decade ago and I still remember this dude. I looked him up recently just to see if he's still working. He is.
Was he?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
This is a cat.
Oh, so many cats featured in this
Good.
next
This is
Monday.
turning
I love it.
Zoom cat discussion. Where's yours gone, Elliot?
I don't know. Yeah, I changed my name because she occasionally, essentially, just here is like the cat tree.
Ah,
So she'll sit there, and then occasionally, like, there'll just be a paw coming in. So so she's around somewhere. But yeah, she'll make an appearance. No, I think it's a really interesting point, Susan, that you were saying that there are good and bad mentors and teachers, and I think because one of the many things in the long version of my story that I did on the way was teaching drums. And I think I'm good. I can explain things, and I have patience, and I can usually use analogies or different ways around a conversation to get people to understand something that they don't understand. But I just realized there was like me and another drum teacher there, and the other drum teacher was just like full energy the whole time. Like, that we were teaching like fairly young kids, and like they just loved working with him because he was just a bundle of energy, and he just kind of inspired like the whole room lit up with love for drums when he came in. And that doesn't like happen externally with me. I feel that, but it doesn't like force itself on all the children. And I just kind of think like, I don't want anybody to kind of like give up playing drums because I didn't have that energy and all that sort of thing. And I just kind of think, hey, I'm a good teacher. If you want to learn, like, we can do it. But yeah, I found my little niche in like we say, mentoring, I think, and it's more working with adults who know where they're headed already. And I just think, like you say, there's different personalities, and they fit into different roles.
well, that was what I was going to ask while Susan was talking there. I mean, there's people that on the surface kind of outright don't seem like they're meant to be mentoring, but I wonder whether there are also people out there that would benefit from having that kind of personality mentoring them. Is there more sort of understanding and encouraging direction? Is that well received by everyone, or do some people maybe learn better under that kind of like the movie Whiplash, like
Absolutely.
drill sergeant kind of?
Liam, you just opened up a can of worms with me about that method.
Yours gone.
And that method doesn't work for me. And I wish that this guy had maybe interviewed me differently, to be like, what do you know that you because I was a senior in college. I was old enough to kind of know how I learn and what I needed and what I was looking for in an internship. Although maybe it was on me to ask different questions about his style, and that might be a valuable thing to tell my students now. Like, hey, you don't have a choice with your teachers because like we're just here teaching you these classes. But in the future, like ask your employer, what is your style? How do you handle if I do something wrong? How are you going to handle that? Because we don't all deal with the same. We don't deal with being shouted at well, some people, or I had really bad anxiety when I was, it's all checked now, but when I was younger, I had horrible anxiety. I had no confidence, and that style that he had just didn't help me at all. It made it so much worse. And other people were able to work with me, and I'm very glad for them because I've made an entire career now from that.
Yeah, I feel like you, as a student or a potential employee, you probably shouldn't have to ask that question. But I think we all know that we live in a world where things that you should and shouldn't have to do aren't always the same as the things that you maybe just do it because it makes life easier in the long run for everyone. What about you, Stephen? How did you get into live audio?
Yeah, so kind of the cliche story of being a musician and then realizing that you're not going to make it, but always had the fascination with technology. So yeah, exactly, Elliot. So I kind of wanted it from the get-go, and I was looking for it. And I went out and basically the minute I got a driver's license, found the most accessible, closest venue that I could get to that my parents would allow me to go work at, and which was a coffee shop and it had some bands. So I started doing that, and then my mom was doing software rep at like Best Buys and stuff, which in the States was like a computer. It still is like a computer electronics store. And one of the guys she worked with also did sound on the side, but he was doing it like legitimately. And so she put us in contact, and I just started emailing him, and eventually I kind of went out to some of the shows and helped him out. And he's probably the reason I'm here in this industry, and the number one person I think of when I think of a mentor. He wasn't as nice, I don't think. He was definitely a good source of knowledge, but I've definitely had people I've learned from that I like their personalities better. But we've definitely stayed in touch through the years, and I also like the idea that there are bad mentors, because there's also been throughout the years working for different companies, especially, I started very, very small, and so like working for very small audio companies, and they would get somebody in for a certain show we were working, maybe we were like subcontracted for, that was for a bigger company in Houston. This guy worked for J&S Audiovisual, but he came from the touring world, and they're like, listen to this guy, he knows what he's talking about, and he was just the worst human being possible. But yeah, I think that's interesting that there's so many, I don't know, I've had a lot of good mentors and a lot of bad mentors. But yeah.
What would you say is a key sort of what would be something that you would look for if you were to pick a mentor for something? Like, say you were entering a completely new field tomorrow. What would be something that you were looking for in a mentor now?
Kindness and willing to share knowledge. I think that was the things that stick out to me. The people that just are excited, the energy, they're excited and they want to share as much as they can with you, and they're accepting, because it can be, like you said, that some personalities may be good with like a whiplash drill sergeant, but some that might discourage them immensely. So I think kindness and willing to share knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, it's all.
Sorry, go on, Scott.
Well, it's just interesting because, I didn't have a whiplash drill sergeant. So my two current sponsors, there was one I had before who, long story short, I'll tell a short version of a long story. He was a fellow sound engineer, and because all right, cool, sweet, I got two sound engineers as my sponsors, two different areas of where our local goes. So I'm like, neat. And our first meeting seemed okay, but then looking back at it, he, at one point, like it was a week or so before I forget how long, before like the meeting where I was going to be inducted, or that part's irrelevant, is I call him up on just something to confirm on. He's like, well, I don't think I should be your sponsor. I'm like, why? And he's like, he gives me a list of things that he says I don't do and just drops it there saying, and I'm not going to be your sponsor. Like, and I'm like, what the hell? You've never told me these are any, like some of the thing, like one thing I'm like, okay, I knew this was an issue, but whatever. But everything else was just like, you've never made a mention of this. And it's not like I hide away and like seal myself off from the world. Like I'm easy to find, and he and I were both Facebook friends, so he could easily reach me, and we work frequently together, or we're at least on the same call. So he could have like during coffee break said, hey Scott, I need to talk to you about this. And I would have been like, fine, that's your job as a sponsor, is to tell me what I don't realize I'm messing up. But what's interesting, fast forward a few months, I get a different sponsor. One of the people who I also respect, his name's Dave, he had heard about it. And when he told me, he's like, what that guy did, that was wrong. He was a real ass to do that to you. And so it's just like, okay, it wasn't just me screwing up, it was him. I later found out the reason why he was also hesitant was in the past he had a reputation of bad luck of he picks people he'd either sponsor, they get in, but then a year or two later they disappear, or they'd screw up really royally. So he was apparently just really hesitant. And I'm just like, knowing that, I was like, I've been here a few years. Yeah, I screwed up. Everyone makes a screw up. But I'm like, I've done nothing that would claim that was show stopping or like harmed everyone. Every mistake I've made is something that literally the mistake I've made, people are wasting more time telling me about the mistake I'm making than the actual time it took for me to make the mistake and fix it. So that, and also the whole thing about, I personally disagree with the whole whiplash thing, both in music and in our industry, because I think one, it's abuse. Someone can disagree with me, fine, but my personal opinion, the whiplash method, it's 100% abuse disguised as hardball. I'm like, no, it's the same thing in our industry. We've all had that person or people who say, we're going to teach you by beating it into you. Whether they don't hit you, they're still beating it into you. And I'm like, my local, we have an issue, like we don't have a lot of membership. And I know the reason and we lose it often to a lot of the freelance people in the area. And I know exactly why. One of the union houses, who will remain nameless, I know the people there have that idea of like, we'll make you a good stagehand by beating it into you. And I'm like, we've lost a good 10 to 20 people, because first of all, the union house pays badly, even by like, I'm like, I could make one of the house, I'm going off a tangent, but it's going somewhere. I've said to the president of our local, I'm like, as an overhire, I could have made more money working McDonald's and gotten less abuse than working at this union house and getting abused and and it would often get the bigger shows. So you have the in and the out. So you'd have horrible hours, horrible pay, and be abused. I'm like, why would someone who doesn't absolutely love what this work is stay? And I've seen people, I'm like, man, they have they have a lot of potential. They could be a great stagehand, great sound person, light person, whatever. But they didn't want to come back because a whole bunch of people literally ran them out of the venue, metaphorically. So I'm like, that's another problem with our industries. There's still a lot of that old belief of we need to beat it into you. And I'm sure it exists in other industries, but we're going to be the last industry for that to die off. And the day it dies off, I'll be a very happy man. Sorry, I kind of went off on a rant, but thank you.
Do you think there's any benefit? Has anybody got maybe an example or anything of a bad mentor being a great sort of learning experience? You know, I think like, or not necessarily even mentor, but you know, like you work under a great production manager in one company and a terrible production manager the next day, and you sort of go, hey, yeah, I want to be like that person and not like that person.
We discussed, we kind of brought something up similar was it last week, Scott, where we were talking, or I was talking about a production carpenter for some of the larger touring musicals in the UK. And a lot of our newer staff always got the impression, the first time they ever worked with him, got the impression that he was being a bit of a bully. I honestly I honestly totally disagree with their sort of impression of him being a bully. Uh, I think maybe sometimes he probably could have toned it down a little bit. Um, but I also think that a lot of, particularly, and this is just me speaking for very specific people, I'm not trying to generalize entire groups of people, but that kind of generation of crew that I had at that time really, really disliked anyone showing any kind of authority. It was, they didn't like being told off if people thought they were doing something wrong. They didn't like being told what to do if they were doing nothing. And they definitely didn't take well to someone raising the voice or sounding in the least bit urgent, which, like we discussed last week, was pretty much all this guy was doing. His job was to get a show in and get it out within a time frame. He knew exactly which pieces of set need to go out in which order. He knew how many people. He could walk into the venue, read the crew, and know exactly which people to put on which job. He would come 18 months past since his last visit, and he'd remember 3 or 4 different faces, and he'd say, you, and you. You've worked on this before. I'll give you this job. Take him, her, him, her, him. Go. And people just didn't like it, and I know that's kind of different, but it's all I'm meaning by it is there was this kind of this attitude of, I don't like being told off, or I don't like feeling like I'm being told off, even if it was just something really minor, like if someone went to take the wrong piece of set out and he told them to put it down and get something else, it was immediately, I've taken offence that I've been spoken to like that. And sometimes it's more of just a get on with it, because the more of a deal you make of it, the longer your night's going to be. It's absolutely not. If he was stood there swearing at people and screaming at them and giving people abuse, then that would be a different matter. But I think there's just kind of levels to what we're talking about here. That whole Whiplash character was probably a little bit too far, and I've never had anyone quite that bad. Hazel, who I mentioned, I don't mind saying her name. She won't be watching this. She was pretty close. She came pretty close to being that character. But usually with visiting companies, she would usually get aggressive with people who were visiting our venue, which kind of didn't really wasn't really leading by example. It wasn't setting a very good impression. So yeah, that was my entry into the world of theatre and live events.
But like, I guess there as well, there's a thing about just personality matches, and if you're working with a particular crew or you're working with a particular company, I know people who, there are companies that lots of people I know and have worked with say that they're a great company to work with and I really like the atmosphere, and like I don't get on with any of those people, so I'm going to assume that the company that they're talking about isn't a company I want to work with. Having not ever worked with that company or been in a crew with those people, it's just kind of, you get a feel for like, maybe that's if I were put in that situation, I'd probably be the ugly duckling of the group and just kind of not fit with how they work. And that sounds a little bit like your set carp, who's like, he's got his way of working. Actually, that probably works great for you. It maybe doesn't work so well with the other crew. And again, I've been on the flip side of that. There are engineers and companies that I work with that other people say are a nightmare. Yeah. And I've never had a bad experience with them. And I just kind of go, no, we work well together. And maybe that's because I'm much more likely to, if somebody just tells me, I want you to do A, B, and C, I'm just like, great, if that's what's going to make my day easy, I'll do that. Yeah. And I think a lot of people just kind of go, no, I want it done my way. And if you get 2 of those people, you get this like horrible sort of clash thing of, balls butting heads. And that's as applicable to mentors and mentees, I think, and people in the various rungs of crews as it is to, freelancers and house staff. I guess it's kind of
So
the sort of personal politics comes into all of it. Is what I'm saying.
yeah, absolutely. So what makes a good mentee then? Is mentee the word? Sounds right.
I think, for lack of a better term, unless someone can correct us, I think mentee is a good one. Yeah, like how to be a good student. Though on just a side note, just this quick story I remember of like the bad ones that to learn from too. Like long story short, I was and did a quick 1-day internship at like a music venue, and it was actually, long story short, I gotten the gig because it was through a class at my college where it was like we were doing a mock interview, and it was like, you know, pick a show at this venue and pick a position, of course, front of house guy. And I actually was talking with the mock interview with the guy who was doing the interview, who actually kind of ran the place. And at the end of the interview, I actually said, could I actually do it? And he's like, what? I'm like, no, I know you got someone set up, but could I like go to the show and like shadow the person? And he was like, sure. And like for weeks after, people were like, Scott, how'd you get it? How'd you get it? I just asked. But one thing I learned at the show, I'll name the band. The band was Big D and the Kids Table. Really neat ska band out of Boston. I won't name the venue or the person, but during the setup, and it was like a few bands opening up, and the sound guy there, I remember, it sticks in my mind to this day. He had his laptop and it was watching ESPN, watching a baseball game. And I'm like, whatever, during the downtime. He had the thing on the whole during like sound check, pre-show, and I think during the show itself. And I'm just like, so where is your focus? Like, he wasn't like staring at the screen, but I'm just like, I'm thinking, where's your focus?
Did he do a good job?
It was decent, but it was just that idea of like, the back of my mind always was like, if that wasn't on, would he have focused on the show even better? Like, again, it wasn't a horrible sounding show, but I'm like, there was potential for it. It's just that idea of like, it just seemed like one of those, you know, sometimes a good mentor teaches you what you should know and what you shouldn't. And just that idea of like, man, that just seems really unprofessional. Like, what if, like, I've also heard stories, this is the tell on a flip side, someone, I can't remember who the artist was exactly, but it was one of those artists that was on their way down of having gone their way up. But anyways, he was telling the story, the sound guy for the band was telling the story like when he was working at some podunk place, he was doing sound for a house band that he's like, I hated the band, but he had the idea of like, I'm going to make it sound as best as possible. This is my job. He gets, at the end of the show, one of the shows, he gets a card from some guy in a suit saying, hey, I like your style, call this. And the guy's like, well, who are you representing? He's like, I can't tell you. Here's a ticket to LA. Here's the flight. Gets on the flight. It's Jay-Z who he's doing sound for. And this is when like Jay-Z was like, he's still big now, but like at the biggest. So it's just like that idea I learned from that guy on that one bit of like, every show you mix it as though it matters. Like some shows we all know, we're not going to get the guy up in the suit saying, hey, I want you to mix this AAA act. But it's that idea of every single show you should care as though that person is in the audience. And not like I'm trying to advance my career, but just that idea of like every show you should, even if you despise the music or whatever act you're doing, that idea of do the best you can.
That's like the age-old saying, "You're only as good as your last show." that one always sticks out.
When was everyone's last show?
We'll just go off topic for a moment on it, just to chat, because I think we can still get back to the mentee bit, but I think this would be a fun little mini topic. For me, my last show was a traveling kids show where I was what I like to call, I've said this phrase several times, the traveling house sound engineer, where at this venue, it was, there was a book called, I can't remember what the name of the book was, but it was just one of those kid book tours where they're doing a play of the book. Gene Machine, the Word Machine. See you later, Seth. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
And just getting one of those kind of shows. And I remember like the house guy manager was like getting on my case that sound check was taking too long. It wasn't taking that long. And he's just one of those people you're like, do you even care what the show's doing? But anyway, so during sound check, at one point he's getting on my case. And I go, if you keep telling me to speed up, I'm going to slow down on purpose. but I was caring about sound check and he wouldn't even let me like play some reference tracks. He let me play a song for 5 seconds but that's neither here nor there. But it was interesting watching that show because it was like, I had never heard of the book. I'd never seen this tour. So it was just like, here you go. And it was just a fun experience because like it was the nice thing about kid shows at that level, they don't bring a lot of stuff. They fit it into a Sprinter van and that's it. So load in takes about 30 minutes, load out is 30 minutes and you're done. They have no stupid complex set piece and it just runs in. And I even told them also, it's like, I never needed to mute anything because they were so aware of where their movement was and everything that, well, also, sorry, to give a clarification of kids theater, there was actually no kids in it. All the actors were adults, but they were doing a show for kids. So you didn't have to worry about the challenges of kids theater. But kids shows are another, but that was just kind of my last show. And what was funny, I'll end on this little tidbit. I had worked at that venue several times and I knew the board. It was supposed to be an Allen and Heath T112. I like the board. So I like had my computer all set up, made sure I had that offline editor working. I'd had the app installed on my iPad. I get there and there was a new version of the M32. I'm like, okay, cool. I would have liked to have known this because I could have done some better prep, but it was like, surprise.
Hey, is it all right if I jump in, you guys? I'm gonna have to take off pretty soon.
Yeah, go right ahead. I was gonna at some point be like, Nathan, jump in.
Yeah, I haven't said anything yet because I don't really have any great stories. That's the funny thing about being kind of in my position is I'm better at like asking other people questions than I am at like recounting, entertaining anecdotes. But I can share with you guys that one of the reasons that I ended up working in education is because I had such a hard time finding information, getting training, finding opportunities. Since it was such a struggle for me, then I started trying to show up for other people to help them out. And it was only, a few years ago that I learned that not everyone has these struggles. And so one of the things that you guys may have noticed already is that sometimes you think that someone works in a profession because they're naturally good at that thing, when often the reverse is true. So for example, a lot of people, I've met a lot of personal trainers because of my wife, and a lot of those people have body issues that they had to work through for years and then learned a lot about bodies and now are personal trainers. And so I went through a lot of challenges, and because it was so hard for me, in my mind, like, you must all need help with this because it was so hard for me. And so, I started trying to like create opportunities to help people around that stuff. So I just wanted to share a couple things, which are, number one, I don't think I have ever a mentor that I could really point to. It was just a lot of like teachers that would show up at the right time or I would reach out to. And, but that is a thing that I definitely recommend to everyone. But so one of the reasons that I didn't have a lot of mentors is I feel like, first of all, no one ever told me that that was a good idea. And now I think of this as the Tony Robbins method when I tell other people about it, which is basically find, if there's a thing that you want to learn how to do or get good at, you find the top performer in the world, or, I think that's the thing. You find the 5 top performers in the world and you go ask them, like, how do you do this thing? And I think I just always defaulted to the DIY approach, which is what most people do, because no one ever says to them, like, why don't you go ask Steven? Like, he knows about RF. Like, no one knows that Steven does. So we don't have a formalized mentoring process, except in some areas like Scott mentioned in New York Broadway, things like that. It's largely unregulated. We're all sort of making it up as we go along. So just a couple of things I wanted to share before I go. I think one of the best things you can do is share with people how to get started. And so instead of saying to people like, you should go to school, like big commitments, you should go to school, you should read this book even. The books can be good, but like whenever people come to, for example, my friend Matthew here works at the Guthrie Theater, and often people will come up to him afterwards and say like, what does all this stuff on this board do? How do I get to do this job? And he'll say, why don't you come shadow me tonight? And very rarely do people actually say, or, not tonight, they were at the show, the next day. Very rarely do people actually say, oh, it's a good idea. And then sometimes they do. And And so he's really clear about helping them understand like this next step that they can take. Sit right here, don't see anything, write down all of your questions. We'll talk about it after the show. No one ever said that to me. You know, I've asked lots of people like, how do I get your job? You know, how did you get to do this? And people have told me some stuff, but it was never that helpful where they're like, here's a real action you can take right now, and here's how I'm going to help you. So that's a really helpful ways to tell people like a real help action step that they can take right now. And in terms of being a good mentee, I've noticed that a lot of people don't follow up. So one of the biggest things that I try to promote people to do is that you reach out and you ask for some specific kind of help, and then you follow up and you talk about like, here's what I did with the information that you gave me. I talked to this person, I did this thing, here's what I've learned, because that is what the mentor gets out of the relationship, or that's part of what they get out of the relationship, is seeing you grow. And so you kind of like documenting that for them is really helpful. I guess the last thing I'll say, well, two things. One, some of the best mentors I've had are people that I've hired and were coaches and trainers and just turned into being really good mentors and other things. And the last thing will be this book that I'm reading right now called The Culture Code. And it's just really good researched ideas about how to build strong cultures. And that could be two people or a large group of people. But for example, the first thing is trust. And it's like created in an ongoing basis. And we're all giving like unconscious or conscious clues about whether or not this is a safe place for us to talk, and share things about ourselves. And so if Susan were to, give some kind of clue that this is not safe, then like Elliot would probably not want to share stories about how he was, teaching drums. And then the opposite is true as well. And so I think that's important for a mentor relationship. So thank you for letting me give a little monologue. I didn't have a great story about getting started. Also because I change all the time. Like now I'm working on some little software things and I'm looking for people to teach me about like MATLAB and other like tools. And 6 months from now, I'll be like doing something different. So I've never like found a mentor that was like consistently like had the next thing I need. So I'm always just I've learned how to like find the next teacher that I need. Anyway, I love that you guys are talking about this, and thanks for continuing to do the Mixing Mondays.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Nathan.
Nathan.
And you actually, it's a great segue for like kind of the next part, I feel, like how to be a good mentor. So, and again, thanks, Nathan, for coming. And for those watching too, we do these every week. So catch you later, Nathan. Thanks for your time. And what's kind of the segue now, because I think we've told our fun stories about who's been good and bad mentors.
We didn't finish our fun stories about what we all last worked on.
Okay, I'll put a pin in that. Thank you, Liam.
That went nowhere.
Well, it went with me telling my story, so it was like, well, Ben, Liam, since you brought it up, what was your last gig before we all got thrown into our houses because of COVID?
Everyone knows what my last gig was. I was in France and Switzerland at the start of the year. If you bear with me 1 second, I'm going to try and get the hang of this, Scott. I'm going to share. That's the last thing that I worked on. And that is a Queen tribute act called One Night of Queen. I'm not sure if any of you guys over in the States have heard of them. They were actually in the States when COVID kind of hit big time. And they all had to come home from there at the same time that I had to come home from Germany when I went all the way to Germany for my dinner. But yeah, that was the last show I worked on. It was a nice, colourful picture that I thought I'd share with everyone just to brighten up my own evening, if nothing else. Same for Elliot. It's getting late over here, Scott. We have to do something to keep ourselves happy, like looking at a bunch of flowers.
Okay, well then, okay. Stephen or Susan, what was the last thing you were kind of doing before we got all thrown into the COVID quarantine?
Sorry, I forgot that Susan was actually there. I thought you were just giving Stephen the option of which name he wanted to respond to.
Yeah, so we were on, I guess, tours. We basically just never stopped doing shows. The last show we did was March 9th. And it was kind of interesting because it was a fair in Florida. And when we advanced the show, we knew that Leonard Skinner was playing, but they told us they were on a different stage. So we show up for a 1 o'clock load in, and Leonard Skinner's on the stage, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, you're not getting the stage till 3." And we're like, "Wait, what?" And so we had to go sit down with the PM and be like, "What happened here? We didn't talk about this." So kind of condensed our day really tight. We basically ran it like just an opening headline type thing. And it was great. I mean, their crew was super nice and accommodating. They understood the confusion, and like nobody was trying to be like, "Oh, you're ruining our time" or whatever. But so that happened. And then also a buddy of mine who, there's only a few of us that live in Austin with the group that I work with. And we worked together for like 7 years, and he put in his 2-week notice. And he did that on this last run. And so COVID was not, or the March 9th show was not supposed to be his last show, but it ended up being his last show. So all of his gear was stuck in the trailer behind the bus. So we had to make an emergency mission to go drive up to the bus and get his stuff out a couple weeks after. And then, yeah, just last thing about that show, I remember sitting in the green room after our set was done, talking with the TM, saying, because we were supposed to go to Canada in May. And I was like, man, if this COVID stuff gets worse, you think they're going to shut the Canadian border? And then 3 days later, they just canceled everything. So I was like, whoa, all right, so here we are. But yeah, that was my last show, March 9th.
It was such a bizarre kind of like a landslide of action that just it was like everyone around me was doing the same. Or do you think it's going to get worse? Yeah, we probably should get home from France or get home from Germany. Otherwise they might start getting difficult. And then within a day or two of us having discussions along those lines, it was literally like every country in the world had just shut its borders down, and that was it. The world was closed. And I mean, now it's starting to look a little bit more promising, but who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? It's weird though. I'd worked, even though it wasn't the last gig, it was the gig before that, where it was a high school jazz band like showcase, and the production manager of the venue was like, I bought all these like cleaning wipes and all this, thinking, oh, okay, all we're need to do for this is just make sure everything's clean at the end of the night. So it's like they were acknowledging, but we didn't realize the scale of it. Like, and like when I wanted to, typical, as my professional manners of like giving him a handshake at the end of like, thanks for having me as master sound for it. We had to do the silly shake, because it was like, even then we were knowing that like it was contacted by hands, but it was just, it's weird. That was 6 months ago. Like all of this has been 6 months. So, which I know it's kind of, we're on the mentor thing, but I figure it would be another fun little quick topic, unless anyone wants to like jump to the next part, is like, what has everybody kind of been doing for those of us who, because I know some people haven't gotten more free time during this, but those of us who have, like, what have you been doing with this time beyond, in some way to maybe better yourself, or like, yeah, like, and I'll kind of just start with what I'm doing. That way people are like, well, what is he talking about? So like, everyone who's been doing sound, we've all been doing the, taking, multi-tracks and like doing mixes and stuff. But like, I've been doing other things too. Like one thing I immediately when COVID hit, Act Lighting, it was like one of the top distributors of the Grand MA series of light boards, was like, hey, our class that's normally like $500, it's going to be free. So I jumped and dug as much into that. It was using the offline editor, but just this idea of like, I want to learn something else besides, I was still learning sound, but learning lights. And when Scott Adamson partnered with, I forget what the name of the company is, but like the lighting teaching class, I was like, you know what, I need to learn the real basics. Like I've, kind of BS my way through lighting. I'm like, okay, let's figure out the basics of it. And that's been pretty interesting. And let's see what else I've been doing. I've been doing a whole lot of baking and cooking, like that I just never had time to before. Like, you know, before I would like eat out or like get fast food or like, you know, make food I already knew how to make before. But like with all this time, I've been like, you know what? I could spend all day making a cake because I'm like, I got no gig tomorrow. So perfecting that. And kind of the last thing, and I'll even grab a book. I've been on more of the physical aspect, pretty heavy book. I've been really working a lot on bodybuilding, and
Just
what's
lifting the
really,
book.
yeah, it's a thick book. Like, I think it's thicker. Here's the Yamaha reinforcement sound book for comparison. That's how this is.
I love how the Yamaha book is the universal kind of sound engineer measurements for how thick a book is.
Yeah, like we all
your
know how
reference.
thick. Yeah, we all know how thick this book is. But what's interesting too is, and I'll just end on this, and everyone can see, is there's also in bodybuilding, there's like learning bits of
There
philosophy.
you go.
Yep.
Steven's going.
Yeah, the philosophy of like, I'll just end on this. He was saying that like Arnold is talking about like, you don't have to be born with the perfect body to do bodybuilding, because he was mentioning this guy who became like the top athlete, was absolutely horrendous at sports in high school, but because this guy had the drive to learn all this, he wasn't technically the best or like naturally gifted, but it was because he had this desire to want to learn this. And just that idea of like, because there was periods where I would have people who were like, they could tell, oh, that's feedbacks at 1K. And I'm like, okay, I know it's high frequency. I can't tell that frequency what it exactly is, but it's this idea of like, you can still keep learning to that knowledge and get there, even if you're not born with that innate perfect pitch. So I'm just curious what everyone else has been doing with this time.
I've kind of since Live Sound Summit, I've done very little audio based, to be honest. I mean, we've as we've discussed, we've done kind of mixed comparisons and things like that every now and again. I've done a lot of things in like video editing. I've been learning more about video editing. I've been starting to get back into photography. I've sort of started working on some ideas for a project that I'm going to be working on, hopefully sort of towards the end of this year and into next year, which is going to be kind of photography and video based. I've got to see a lot more of my son. Obviously working, whether it was venue work or whether it was on tour, it's difficult to maintain that kind of family time. Certainly with any like structure or any schedule, because you just work when the work is there. You don't unless you're booking the gigs, then you don't really get choice in what days you're working. So yeah, that's kind of been my bag for the past couple of months. A lot of walking probably 10 miles a day. Yeah. Netflix, man. Netflix and YouTube.
So Steven, what have you been doing? I know a few things you've been doing. It's just interesting to hear what you've been doing to tell.
Yeah. So mainly I've been building the full course for the RF pilot we did last year. But in my free time, I still have a dream to build a system where we can have multiple Part 15 transmitters that are synchronized. So you could, if you need to do an FM drive-in style show, instead of having multiple transmitters that are on different frequencies, they can all use the same frequency, but they create what's called a single frequency network. But that's been a very painfully slow process because I'm trying to do it with my budget, which was bad to begin with, and now with COVID it's worse. But I do have the RF module. I got it completed yesterday. So I can show you a quick idea of this. It's funny because my wife made sure that I memorized her phone number in case I get arrested for this, but here's the RF module.
Yeah, that looks suspicious.
Yeah.
That looks a little suspicious. No, not gonna lie.
Don't take that to an airport.
So combination of these two might be the key, but we'll see. That's the
The main difficulty you're going to
The
have is
key to
explaining to
what?
law enforcement what on earth that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, try to explain to layperson some of the things we have that go into that territory. I'm like, man, I so hope I don't have to go through TSA with this.
yeah. Oh, yeah. TSA.
Like, yeah, you can like explain a soundboard to the layperson, but beyond that, they're like, what the hell is this?
I think if you tried explaining that, you'd sound like Doc Brown.
yeah.
It'd definitely be,
For
it'd be a back to the Future moment, definitely.
I used to carry an antenna that was kind of delicate in actual PVC pipe in my carry-on, and yeah, you can imagine they didn't like that either.
So Elliot, what do you, unless Steven, there's anything else you'd want to share what you've been up to during this, or that kind of it? All right, Elliot, what about you?
I mean, I got pretty deep into the sound side of things, and obviously, Live Sound Summit was a jumping off point for that, and then I took loads of notes, and then all of the presenters have got other stuff on YouTube, and they've got courses and all that sort of stuff. I've been delving kind of into that, and again, yeah, just building up like my mixing chops, even for remote mixing of studio work, like getting really back into that and making sure I'm going to come back as a better mixer. But you know, that's not to say it hasn't been really up and down. You know, it's like I said, this has been like 6 months of this now, so it's been some like really focused time on that, and then some just doing nothing. But you know, I've like recently, now everything's kind of back open again in terms of the things that like my girlfriend and I like to do a lot of hill walking. So you know, we've been up mountains last week, which has been great. And you know, like Liam was saying about seeing his son, you know, just actually having time to spend with people that you never get to see, and like this time of the year especially. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, I don't feel like it's summer or it's been summer or it's nearly the end of summer.
It hasn't
in
been
the Northern
anything.
Hemisphere. I don't like festival season hasn't appeared, therefore it's not summer. And like, especially like for me, I'm a comedy fan as well, so August in the UK is the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is a massive arts festival, but specifically comedy if you're into that kind of thing. And because that hasn't happened, it's like August hasn't happened. It's really weird. There's no festivals, there's no Edinburgh, there's nothing of that is happening. So it kind of feels like it's still March, and I kind of need to get out of that mindset. But actually, I have had the last 3 weeks, I have had one gig per week that was an hour long in a beer garden for an audience of 12.
Wow.
So last year, I think I was working, this time last year, I was working on an event for 12,000, and this year it's 12. But it's a gig, and it's worked, and it's safe, and we've proved that we can do it. And that's been great. And also we had a noise complaint the week before, so I got to turn up with my newfound smart knowledge and go, oh, actually I can do something about this, and we didn't get a complaint, so I'm happy.
I was just gonna say the point you made there about how time's passing. How is that going for everyone else? Like, how does time? Because for me, it very specifically feels like, it feels like each week is kind of flying by. Like, it seems to be the weekend starting every day, and yet the lockdown as a whole, time seems to have kind of just stopped. Like, I think like long-term time and short-term time both feel very, very different to each other at the moment. It's this weird. I don't know whether it's that thing that like time passes quicker when you're a kid because you've got more milestones within each year as opposed to when you're older, and time's like each year. Sorry, the other way around, is it? Whichever. 6-week holidays seem to go on forever when you're, summer holidays seem to go on forever when you're a kid. Time flies when you're an adult, not when you're having fun. But it's just doing really strange things to me, the way time's passing at the moment.
Well, it's interesting, Liam, you mentioned that, and it kind of goes on the philosophy of like, there's where you were talking about, there's like the idea of like people who have quote unquote road signs in their life seems to go slower in a good way, because, and typically like we do have things like it'll be the gig, whether it be freelance, union, or whatever. It's like we're like, okay, here's this tour, here's this show, and you have things you can put to. And now because we've had now 6 to 7 months of nothing really, unless we've lucked out with a broadcast gig. And though even for me personally, it's a little different because there's a lot of things where I was like, man, now I have this time. I want to learn this, as I mentioned, cooking, lighting, like things. I finally have this time. So it gives me a goal every day, and like weightlifting and all this. But I think I also lucked out where I've mentioned this gig before, where small church at the most, it holds 50 people, but the congregation, the priest was like, we like someone to record it. And it's just a little, dinky, home camera, but it gives me a pin every single week that I know, okay, this Sunday has happened because I have to wake up, go to the church, even though it's like pretty much takes a 5-minute walk. But it's that idea of every week there's something that I have on my schedule that I have to do. And one little great moment, I have a picture on my phone, I should have uploaded it, but we had an outdoor service. So I got to use the little Soundcraft UI16 I own, because they were going to have, the person who, they were going to have a keyboard player who also was going to play guitar and sing a song. And the priest, she was going to, talk on the microphone. It was like this little dinky, like this big battery powered, we plugged it in, but battery powered speaker. And part of me is like, man, I miss when, having the line array and having, speakers on sticks. But I was like, you know what? For the moment, this is going to work. The church doesn't have the budget to buy, a line array or any of this. And I was just, and actually for what it worked really well. But it was still great having like sound coming out of a mixer and me like moving faders, adjusting EQ and dynamics. And I was just like, oh wait, this is what this felt like. That high of like, again, it was a small scale, but just that high we all kind of chased of like, oh, this is live. And I'm like controlling it. It was a great feeling to have again. So,
but can you put your finger on how long ago anything was? Like, can you put your finger on how long ago it was that you decided I'm just gonna spend the day cooking?
I would say probably about a month into it, I could put my finger on that.
I have no idea when Live Sound Summit was. Yeah,
Live Summit. Well, for me, I also heavily I use Google Calendar a lot, and I have things. So I always, even before the church thing, I always had things I pinned so I knew like, okay, this is Monday, this is Tuesday. Also, my mother works at home on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So there's already things that tell me, okay, she's working, so it's Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So I have the advantage of that. But I can see for someone who is either living on their own at the moment, like that could definitely be a cause of just like losing it, because it's like, if you don't go to, not getting political, but when we had that $600 a week, there was nothing, you didn't have to go to work. There was, obviously, if you wanted to go groceries, but like within reason, you'd wake up so you didn't have to, you don't have to wake up at X amount of time. So I hope I was trying to answer, I hope I kind of answered the question, but it was.
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking to there's very much like the weekly aspect. Like, I think that's kind of why my weeks are going past so quickly. Is I have, like, on Mondays we do this, on the weekend I've got my boy, but then every one of those weeks is kind of the same. So there's just a lot of weeks that were all very much the same, and no like standout events in the middle of it all that kind of separate the months from each other rather than just the weeks or days.
I'm pretty much with you, Liam. I couldn't tell you when Live Sound Summit was, or like how many weeks it's been or anything. And I was actually away at the start of this year, so in February for 5 weeks I went to New Zealand, which was supposed to be a sort of once in a lifetime trip before a really busy year. And so we kind of I was flying back through Singapore when coronavirus was really starting to sort of come to a head. And that was all like fine, and they kind of had, at that point, they had a handle on it. And then I flew back into Heathrow, and it was clear that Heathrow had no idea what they were doing, and the UK was going to be a mess. I was home for 2 weeks, and I think I had 1 or 2 shows in there, and then we locked down. So not only have I had like no structure because I've been on holiday for a vast period before that, but I've been in the Southern Hemisphere. So I came from summer when it was supposed to be winter hit. So I've had like this really long summer
really
where
long summer.
nothing's happened, and I just don't know. I'm surprised I know what my own name is at this point. Wake me up at some point like next year and go, no, you've got to do some work now. You have to remember what a sound desk is now.
That's a point. Are any of us going to be capable of being mentors when we go back to work? Because is anyone going to remember what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, I think that might just, Liam, that might be a great topic, is just to start. Oh man, I was literally going to call you and tell you how like I was actually going to cite your call, but thanks for like your whole bit when you did the 5% of women in the industry on mentoring and like how do we go forward on this is, I think we just, by having these two is also like helping to tell the story of it. Like there's this great, I'll say it shortly, there's this documentary called When Jews Were Funny. It's just, as it states, it's this guy who's kind of chronologically the history of Jews, the Jewish comedians. And at one point he kind of asked one of the people he interviews, because it's like several comedians and all this, and he asked, well, how do I keep this alive? It's like doing what you're doing right now. You have a camera crew, you're recording it, and now you're going to release it to people. It's like, it's recording the stories. That's how you keep a culture going. And like, yes, we're an industry, but we're also kind of a culture at the same thing. So like, it's a legit worry, Liam, but I think what we're doing right now, no matter how few or many people are doing it, is we're talking about it. And I think to be a good mentor, at least my personal opinion, is to kind of go back to what we were talking about, is first, it's like knowing what kind of person you're mentoring, and knowing what kind of person you are too. Is like, I know my kind of style mentoring probably will not work for all the people I would try to mentor, because I'm always that kind of person. If like someone walks up to me and I'm not like knee deep, like elbow deep and stuff, and someone asks me a question, I will gladly talk their ear off and like teach someone about it. In fact, like right before COVID hit, the venue I've mentioned previously, Highland Center for the Arts, we're in contract negotiations, all that stuff. But there was two people in particular, a guy named Ben and a gal who wants to be called Fish. But particularly Fish, I wanted to mentor around this whole thing of like diversity and all that, like try and include women into our industry. But it was like, because she actually had worked with Dante, and Highland, the whole freaking building is wired for Dante. And I'm like, okay, I want to mentor her, because it was like, there needs to be other people, because at the time I was planning on moving out to Las Vegas. And I'm like, I'm going to be leaving a hole here. It may be a small hole, but it's still a hole I'm going to leave for this place. And I'm like, okay, I want them to be like, okay, tech director, I'm leaving, but here is somebody who, when I leave, they can take my place and they'll actually know what they're doing. So it was, and I think already starting, like, this was my plan, was like to push on gigs that it was like any more than like an acoustic duo, to bring either her or Ben on and be like, here's, Dante in a more regular environment. Because Dante, Stephen, you can attest to this, and Alan and Liam, like Dante is still something that the industry is adapting, but it's not like a widespread where everyone, knows Dante. It's not hard in my opinion, but it definitely requires a little bit of experience here and there to learn. And that was kind of my goal, was just to be like, hey, here's and I even had a class plan there of like, all right, everybody, here's Dante in the real world, because we had a Dante class, but it was kind of all sterile. Like here's the new board. It was also a mixture of a venue tour at some other place, but I'm like, all right, my plan was, all right, I'm going to play on my laptop in the corner. I'm going to play a multi-track. Now figure out how to patch it and using Dante, and mix it also on the system, which, at least to my knowledge, in all of Vermont, there's in an install, there's only one CL/QL series. I think there's another one in the other venue, but it's not a widely used board. I'm like, okay, I'd also want to educate. And I think that's also the key of being mentors, just like you're also kind of being a teacher too, but on a much more intimate scale, for lack of a better term. So, like, how do people feel like, I know it kind of went a whole bunch of different places on that, but it's like, how do
I mean,
you see?
yeah, I've definitely got opinions. Because I think when I first started, as I say, my path was kind of all long and convoluted, and I didn't know, you know, like a couple of other people were saying earlier about having somebody that you can see who is doing the thing that you want to do. And it took me maybe 5 years to find those people. And until then, I was just having around in the dark, and I kind of just needed somebody to say, like my house venue that I've got now, if somebody had come up to me, like maybe 6 years before I got that gig, if somebody had gone, you just need to walk in that front door and say, I would like to crew. If you just said, I want to go and push boxes for you, you would get a job pretty much immediately, because you can walk in and you go, well, look, I've studied sound, I've done this, I've done that. And I just want to join the crew, and they would be really receptive to it. But because everybody sends an email saying, I want to be a front of house engineer, how do I do that? That just gets ignored, because they just have too many of those to deal with, and what they need is people to push boxes. And if you're willing to do that, the path from that to engineer is actually not that long. But nobody, you know, it's like Nathan was saying, nobody tells you that. And you know, so because of that, I found myself in a similar situation that you were describing, Scott, where I was like, I wanted to find, you know, my younger self and go, here's all the tools that you wanted. I can do that now. Here are all the tools. And then you find someone that you think is that person, and their goals are different, or their experience is different, or they have other things that they have kind of knowledge of that you didn't know, but they don't have knowledge of what you consider to be basics. And one of the things, obviously, we've got Stephen here, like one of the main things that I always see screwed up is RF. And people don't want to maybe learn RF, or I assume that, like, well, you can plumb it together, and like if it doesn't work, you know, to change the frequencies. That's not difficult, and you don't have to get into scanning. You don't have to get into all of that, like the more complex side of things, if you're running one channel or two channels. But people just don't understand it. They don't know what intermod sounds like, and they don't know all these things. And again, not to get into specifics, although that is one. You know, I think you can kind of, you can have a plan for somebody. If you're mentoring somebody, you can have a plan of what you're going to do and where you're going to put them, and what they're capable of, and what you would do if you were in their position. But you're not them, and they're not you. And as much as I'm trying to find my younger self and go, here is the key to your dreams, it's right here, I know what it is, and I want that person to go, oh great, thank you, I wish somebody had done that. I've never found younger me, because hey, it's almost like everyone's unique, you know.
Almost.
Yeah, and that's it. Elliot, you bring up an interesting point. Is there's another gal who I've worked at conventions with, and I see she has potential, and I've been trying to also push her. It's like, obviously she lives in Boston, I'm in Vermont, so that's a huge distance, and so I can't mentor her in person. And the only times I mentored her was for conventions, which now too are also completely bust because of COVID. But I was trying to at least, you know, like Scott Adamson had, like, you know, the Essential Live Sound course you can pay for, but like he had 2 or 3 lessons that were free, and I was like trying to push her to be like, I understand money's tight, but like try at least these. And like, I don't know if she's looked at them, but just that idea of like, well, let's see, you know. And it's a little frustrating because I was like also trying to be like, hey, if money's also a thing, Sound Girls has had these grants that like you can apply for, and it's like that challenging of like I'm not pushing hard, but it's like that frustration of like, you know, you want to, like, I'd be like, look, I would have loved to have like had, like, you know, when I first started, like someone say, oh yeah, by the way, here's this grant for like $500 or $1,000 that you could use to get these courses. Because like, yes, YouTube stuff we find is great, but like I've also found during this COVID thing, like a lot of the premium stuff have been incredibly useful. Like again, the ACT course was like, I even watched some free stuff on the Grand MA too, which were great, but like watching that premium stuff, I was like, wow, okay, it's like the saying, you get what you pay for. So I was like, it is that frustration of like, why aren't you accepting all this like shortcuts I'm trying to give you that aren't like bad shortcuts, that are just like fast tracks, for like a better term. Like, you're gonna make mistakes like I did, but I'm like, I want to help you get to that point quicker.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm trying to build something at the moment that's you know, more of a structured way to mentor somebody, like quite specifically to go from perhaps like a college graduate up to, you know, where I was sort of when I started to make my living in live sound. And I think there is a way to do that, and I think there is a sort of a path you can follow. But it's kind of about, just saying that, here are the tools that you need to do it, and here are the shortcuts, and here are all the mistakes that I have made. So my 6-year path, I've condensed that down to a few people that I've sort of been through, and I've trained, as you've said, Scott, to like essentially replace myself, that I can send in sort of my stead on gigs, and it's taken a year. And that's usually because that's how long it takes to get them enough experience on enough different types of shows that they have all of the pieces. This one has simple RF, this one has a monitor mix, this one has in-ears, this one has, a particularly picky singer. And eventually then you end up being able to do, a 32 input show where you've got all of those things together. And that might take a year to do, but it's like, it took me 6 years. So I've got it down to a year. Can I then get it down to, a course that's a number of hours, or it's, plus whatever experience you need, and it's real world experience rather than, book learned knowledge, and it's that sort of thing. But I think there's a huge thing about learning from the mistakes of others, because you can make them all yourself, but it's going to take ages. And we've all done it. We've all made those mistakes. So here's a book of them. Just go read those. Don't make the mistakes I did. Go make your own mistakes.
Elliot, that's an interesting idea. Like, there's the Get On Tour book. Would that be a great collaboration project where we just call it like something like, I don't know, the Book of Sound Mistakes, where we just all like each chapter or whatever, just us sharing stories like, here's the screw ups I made that you probably would learn from. But what's interesting too, I was thinking too, and there's a topic I kind of wanted to talk about too, is like, I don't know if it's a topic, but just like a thought I had is like, we've all had these eras, like depending on who we've listened to, of like when they grew up, but it's like, I'm thinking like, how many like sound guys or gals are we not going to get because of this 6-month period where there was nothing? Like, again, I've said this before, and this is my personal belief, unless you lucked out with a broadcast gig, which that's like the definition of 1% is broadcast. It's like, there was not even like an DIY, like, hey, I had a cheap system, but they played out a couple of gigs and I learned the basics. There's like, there isn't even that exists anymore. So it's like, who are like, I'm not trying to be that pessimistic, but I'm like, man, did we, because of COVID, we lost the next Pooch or the next Dave Rad or, Lauren or whoever, like, who have we now lost? We've lost a lot of other things, but just that's a thought that kind of just is like, man, what did we lose because of the 6 months? That opportunity did not exist, or that show didn't happen for that one gal or guy that they just don't. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this topic, is like, to make up for what we didn't get is like, try and foster the few who have like, they got started but couldn't go to the next level of like, to actually do shows. Because like, I started doing, before I really did shows, I had to do the grunt stuff, but it's like, who is also in that similar position where they were like about to start getting those actual gigs where they could touch the board. And I think, sorry, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent on this one. Just like,
it's got to work the other way as well, though, Scott. Is my audio coming through? I can't.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed me going a little bit blank in the middle of Elliot's last discussion. My audio interface died on me like it was doing during Live Sound Summit. I think I used those 3 words and it decided to die. Yeah, you're talking about. I feel like I'm shouting now because I can't hear myself. The way I was set up before, I was monitoring my own audio as well. So you're talking about the industry potentially having lost upcoming people that may have turned out to be great engineers, but there's also the potential there that there may well have been a whole host of capable engineers out there that were getting work because they were already established, but who maybe didn't actually care particularly for the industry, and because of this have left. So we may also see that there's actually some work available. If this sort of theoretical same amount of work as was previously there suddenly reappeared, there may be holes there to fill. from people who've just thought, I can't work in an industry that's this unstable. I need to go and find something else, and they've now gone and, stacking shelves or working in a pub or whatever takes their fancy. So it kind of is potentially going to work both ways.
Yeah, because it is interesting. That is something I've thought of too. It's like wherever would be here, or when I moved to Vegas, because I'm still planning on going there, is like, what opportunity that if I had moved a year before will now be there, because there's so many people who, because we've all encountered the person who is like, I don't like doing this, it's a paycheck. And now because there was, for a period, there was other ways to get a paycheck, they probably went somewhere else and not coming back. So that's going to be an interesting, like, in the future of like I'm willing to bet there's also going to be, now conversely on the upside, is like there's going to be, I'm willing to bet like 5-10 years from now, we're going to hear some person interviewed by Nathan going, and I got the gig because, the previous person quit because of COVID, and then I got right in there. So I think that's going to happen too.
Right. And well, also the other flip side of what you're talking about, Scott, is so maybe because of COVID, all the gigs stopping, we miss the next, super engineer, but also maybe this downtime gives birth to the next super engineer, because now they have all the time to go and actually study, sound that maybe they're always interested in it, but never had the time to. So by the time we actually start doing shows, they're so hungry and eager to actually go do something that they've, been spent 6 months learning the book side to go do it live. Maybe this actually gives birth to the next round of, and so maybe there's a positive aspect to that too. I mean, but you did mention that opinion was pessimistic. So.
Yeah, and I'm usually an optimistic, but no, and that's also, Stephen, like, even, and I'm kind of an example in a weird way of it. It was like, yeah, I've been doing all this other stuff, but I've also been focusing on audio so much. Like, I've been, when I can, doing the sound gym and doing this stuff, and like really digging into, like, for example, really digging into like, how does a compressor, because most of the times I was so busy, I'm like, okay, throw, 3-to-1 ratio and just get it so it acts as like a limit, a limiter. But now I could be like, okay, how does it really, like, I've had this time. And I think it also will be the example of like people, I consider myself an intermediate level mixer. Like there's probably other people who are like, now can use that time to really hone in on that skill and get to the, the super level of that. So it's using this time wisely, and like things I've always wanted to learn. And it is fascinating. Just like it's also kind of, I think, unless someone really wants to dig more on this, I think what's interesting about this time and doing these and just other things is it's given us a lot of time to really look back at our industry, because we've all been, I don't know about anyone else, but like even me, I was always so busy, like, and I knew there was issues in our industry, but I'm like, how many issues now can people really talk about? Like, off the top of my head, overworked hours, harassment, like malpractice, safety, like all these things that we just kept going to the next one because like we always had that mentality of the show must go on, keep going. But now we've had 6 months to go, why the frick were we doing it this way? What the hell? So that's my hope, is like that this time also like it instills some good change in our industry, and an industry that doesn't like to change.
That's where I'm gonna be pessimistic. So I'm totally with you on that one, where it's look back at all things that are wrong, but there's always that the other company. So there's always someone's gonna do it. If you say there's a safety violation, I'm not gonna touch it. There's always some company in the industry we'll do it or whatever. So yeah, like you said, that's gonna be a hard one to change.
And we just put in a quote as well that's what should I say about this? Yeah, we quoted on a job that we put in our sort of our pre-COVID quote and just kind of went, yeah, this is how much it costs for us to do this job, and we lost it because somebody was cheaper, and and obviously that happens all the time anyway. But like, there's definitely part of me going like, how cheap is that other person? Because I wouldn't be surprised if people are just going to go, I've got no work, I've had no work for 6 months. Give me £10 and a curly whirly and I'll do the job. That might be a British candy, don't know.
I was wondering how many people would get that reference.
Yeah, at least us two, which is 50%. That's pretty good. But yeah, it's still who is going to be doing that job? are they going to be doing the usual health and safety stuff, never mind the infection control side of things? And I think you just kind of have to go, hey, someone's going to do it, and it's not going to be me. And I think there will be some good change, I think, but also there's going to be that adjustment period where actually the people that are putting in the good change are not going to get the first few gigs. And I think we just have to sit there and kind of be, hope that our sort of, our self-awareness and the sort of knowing that we're doing the right thing, hoping that kind of gets us through a couple of months of not having work and just kind of going like, it'll come back to us. The fees will come back.
Well, what's interesting, sorry.
I was just finishing the point, was just going to say it's the same for freelancers, where somebody's maybe going to offer less money, or even a freelancer is going to offer to do it for less money. And I think, and this is not a unique point at all, this has been talked about a lot, but the professional answer to that has to be, well, I would take less money because the economy's tanked if over the last 15, 20 years, we'd been taking more money as the economy was rising, but that wasn't the case. So, we have no confidence that like the money's going to go back up again if it goes down. So we just have to say this is the rate, and if anything, it needs to go up, not down.
Yeah, and I think everyone kind of needs to band together and just say, we're not bringing our prices. But like it's been mentioned, if everyone in the industry banded together and said we're not lowering our prices, one person is going to pop their hand up and go, oh well. Someone's going to profit here. It happens constantly.
Yeah, that's. Oh well, it was just also interesting. And this is more of a rant and off topic, and is we've all seen these bands that we either follow or whatever, and like they've been doing the few bands that were that were in the same area, so they didn't have to worry about quarantining themselves. But it's like, you would think this would be the time where more of us during this downtime would get hired by bands to be like, hey, we're doing this live, and we're doing our, a Twitch stream or whatever. Can you do our sound for us? The person who's been doing sound for us on tour for the past 10 years. But what do? They put an iPhone on a music stand, and then they wonder why it sounds like trash. And they're like, well, this isn't a profitable thing. I'm like, yeah, because people tune in for about 10 seconds. It sounds like a garbled mess, and then they leave. And maybe it's just the musicians where I live. Maybe someone else can say, oh, yeah, no, I'm lined up with all this work from all these musicians. It's one of those frustrating things that it's like, you would think there would be more of a demand for that in what's going on now.
Can people afford to bring in anyone else though?
Yeah, I think that's the key. It comes back to the band that's got the QU mixer at the side of the stage. And I mean, I use QU. There's nothing against the gear.
Right. No, it wasn't the mixer.
I'm standing in front. I'm in front of the speakers. I can hear what's coming out of them, and that's the difference. And I think with live streams, I mean, I've even seen engineers doing it badly because they're mixing for what would usually be mixing in their room, and they don't have an appreciation of what broadcast standards are, and they're not listening. It's quite clear that they're not listening to whatever magic, Twitch or YouTube or whatever they're streaming on is doing to the audio. So they might be sending a perfectly great mixed signal out, but it's not coming back like that, and you have to listen to what the end result is. And I mean, hopefully a few people will start doing it, and you will get that difference between, hey, this live stream sounds really good and this one sounds really bad. I don't know why. And then that's where we can sort of come in. But I think that's been the case for years with, bands doing their own sound, or, there was a discussion on one of these forums recently about, bands mixing their own monitors. And I think people think, yeah, I've got an app, I can do it on my phone. And then they get somebody who's a pro monitor engineer and go, hey, this sounds a lot better than it did yesterday. And then they really start to see what the value is. But I think Liam's got a really good point that like musicians are really struggling to keep themselves afloat. And that's what the live stream is about, is like, how do I make money doing this? And, their immediate thought is like, a fee for an engineer is just not even in the ballpark of what they can afford. Forgetting that actually that might be the thing that gets the professionalism that gets a lot more people involved.
Yeah, I use a similar analogy to would you rather do your taxes by yourself, or would you pay an accountant? Yeah, the accountant's going to cost you a lot more, but at the end of the day, the IRS, or whatever the version of the IRS is in Europe, they're not going to be pounding on your door saying, hey, you filed this wrong. By paying the accountant, while you have to pay them, you're going to get the most you're going to get if you get a tax return, or you're going to pay the least back that you have to. So I'm hoping, and that kind of happens, there will be bans, and it is interesting. There's resources out there. It's interesting, at least in my experience, a lot of them happen to be like videos done by people who do church services, because that, even before COVID, like, churches were doing broadcast mixes. So the whole broadcast mix, problem is I don't know any broadcast mixers. It'd be interesting. There's one YouTuber I might even consider. I think maybe one of these weeks we just do whole thing on broadcast mix, but I don't know. But that is an interesting challenge, because it's like, we are so used to mixing for the room, and a broadcast mix, you have no room. You have a phone or your headphones.
I'd love to know exactly what it is that YouTube does with your audio. Has anyone else tried to mix a track by monitoring from YouTube Live? Because there's about an 8 or 9 second delay, and if you're EQing to that, it's next to impossible. You're trying to sweep through an EQ with an 8 second delay is just mind-boggling.
I think you have to treat it like walking the room, where you do your mix changes. You kind of go, yeah, that sounds great to me, and then you go listen to the effect that you had on the mix, and then go back. I think if you're trying to, you've kind of got to have that approach to it, rather. If you're trying to live mix, then you say, every little thing you do has an effect. 8 seconds later, and you've already moved on. I've never tried it. It sounds like a nightmare.
What 12 dB into like 2K and just go, well, that's not doing anything, and then forget that you've done it and leave it, and 10 seconds later it just blows your ears out.
What about, has anyone tried to do any kind of like spectrum analysis of YouTube, like send pink to it and then read it on the back end and see what
it's bizarre. It's bizarre looking.
Is it?
Yeah. There's nothing above 16K, I think. And then everything else is just constant. Like, I've played around with the averaging and the smoothing to try and get some kind of usable information, but everything's just constantly moving. So it's not even a constant, YouTube takes this out at this frequency. It's just like...
This really is a rabbit hole that we're going down now, but what I found really interesting with Zoom, when somebody, was it Lou did it on the one guy?
I think so.
Somebody went through Zoom, and the IR moves. So I find that really interesting, that there is not a latency for Zoom, and obviously that puts the kibosh on live collaborations, where people go, if we just get the latency down, we can jam in our rooms, and it's just like, well, you can't, because it moves. So you can't even play out of time together and then kind of work out how far to shift it, because it speeds up and slows down with your internet connection. Which, now that, it makes a lot of sense when you hear these conversations that people do slow down and speed up as you're talking to them, and you kind of go, that's what's happening. It's just internet speed.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's some kind of some sort of data compression going on. There'll be like variable bit rate or something, where if there's not much happening, it'll just compress everything, and then when things start moving, it kind of has to back off on the data compression. So you're only ever seeing in terms of the video, you're only ever really seeing the difference between one frame and the next. And that would, if you were getting the same kind of effect on audio, things would just be all over the place. If it's something that's variable, so I don't know what they're doing. But that and internet speed not being, if the internet speed, including Wi-Fi, was just one set concrete number, that would definitely help. But,
it doesn't help that even like a lot of developed nations don't have high speed, but don't have that great. Like, America is a perfect example of, we're a very developed nation. We have one of the worst internet speeds in the world for a developed nation. It's kind of pathetic. But it'd be interesting to see to my knowledge, I think it's like Japan has one of the top 5. It'd be interesting to see like, but even still, even in a country like, but that's also why, you know, and no matter what the what digital audio interface we're using, they say don't go more than X distance because then you'll start getting latency. And that's within like a local network. You're not doing Wi-Fi, you're doing everything with switches. Now imagine the latency, and we experience it like over the internet to go from different places. So I think that's also not only, even if you take Zoom out of the picture, just the nature of how data travels and how we hear music. Because I forget, the human ear has, I forget what, there's a I forget how many milliseconds it is. There's a tolerance that at a certain point the ear doesn't notice it, but after, you know, Y, it is noticeable. I forget what the number is. I've heard it somewhere, but
it's somewhere between 2 and 4 milliseconds for latency on in-ears, which is probably, you know, might be the number you're looking for.
yeah. So
Depends what you're talking about as well. If you're talking about latency if you're talking about in-ears where you're getting the same sound in both ears and you can hear the live equivalent, say you're stood next to a guitar amp and you can hear a guitar amp and the guitar in your ears, then that just noticeable difference will be different to if you're talking about hearing a stereo spread, so the just noticeable difference between 2 ears. Because then once you get down to the just noticeable difference between 2 ears, you're looking at a different figure depending on how high or low on the frequency spectrum you are as well. Because the brain just, you know, some frequencies go around your head and some don't. And you're getting into a rabbit hole.
well, which is interesting too. You mentioned that. I was watching a Christian Pooch video, and he was mentioning that your ear is 360. It's one of the few senses we have that you can hear, because you can hear behind you.
Mm.
Which again, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But it's, and I remember like people being like, "Oh yeah, this whole like COVID thing, like everyone's, you know, concerts are gonna be gone." I'm like, I know enough about technology that this is only like this will not replace live concerts. Like, in fact, it's made them hungrier, because like that Common show I mentioned, there was about, I'd say 200 people there. I live in a town that has only about a population of about 1,000. So that 200 people came out for a show on a Sunday afternoon tells you just how hungry people are for music. So it's like, people are like, man, when it goes back, people are going to be hungry for music. I'm like, oh no, this will be like, in a weird way, it will be the golden age of live concerts, where like, when it finally gets back, I'm not going to count the first couple of months because people are still going to be scared until like the actual, when the cure for it appears, people are still going to be hesitant. But once we get to that period where like everyone is completely cool with it, I feel it will be like this peak where you look at numbers, will be like even small concerts will constantly get sold out. The big shows, anything of people will just be like, hey, it's a concert coming, let's go. That's my hope.
I'm not sure how scared people are even going to be, to be honest. I mean, I've just before this, I walked down to the shop at the end of my road, bought a bottle of Pepsi, which I haven't touched since. I just took the lid off and forgot to get myself a glass. Not a single person in the shop had a mask on. I got to the till, and then and I said to the girl behind the counter, I said, "Does nobody wear these anymore?" And she went, "We can't enforce it." So because there's nobody there to enforce it, people are just, everyone's giving up. Nobody cares.
Well, to give you kind of some optimistically, I think it's also where in the world you are. Like my state, the governor about a week or so ago, I forget if it was our legislation, our state, not our federal, state government, said on August 6th, if you're outside in a public area, you have to wear a mask. Now, there's still some people who aren't, but before that came into effect, I go to the grocery store, about 60 people wore it. And now since that, I've seen like in a store like that has 50 people, one person isn't wearing it. And so I think it's more of a geography thing. And so it just depends on who. And like, there's even some stores who will like have a sign saying, wear a mask or we will kick you out. So, well, sometimes you can't really enforce it because people getting paid minimum wage at a grocery store, it's like, how much are they going to really fight something? But just it's one of those top-down approaches. Is if the leader of your government or state-wise says, no, this is actually important. So I think it will also, with the same thing with concerts too, to kind of bring this to an actual relevant topic. I'm sure some states you'll go to and no one's going to care. And then other states, people are. So, but I think
Oh, sorry, I just said Florida.
yeah, apparently, here's the scary statistic. I've heard this a few weeks ago, so it could have changed. If Florida was its own country, it'd be the top 5 cases. And if it was its own country, it'd be the top 10 deaths. Florida is, for once I get to say I told you so. I remember someone was like, oh yeah, this was like, I think in April or May, they were like, or I forget when, they were like, oh yeah, Florida's having concerts and they're opening the beaches. I'm like, social distance concerts. Oh no, regular concerts. I'm like, that's going to explode in their face. And they were like, oh no, it's not. I'm like, it's going to. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, boom. I'm like, and everyone's like, well, we don't know how soon or late. I'm like, there's that period and then there's your being an idiot.
Yeah, some people just aren't bothered.
Right. So I think the important part, and I think we've kind of gone really off track, but I think it's, again, the whole point of, and I'll just kind of think this is a good place to end, is just that we're just having these discussions. The fact that we're just not, keeping them all to ourselves, and we're having these, and hopefully it brings something and it keeps us aware of what's going on. So unless anyone else is kind of on these topics to talk about, I think we're kind of found a good end point.
I'm good to end there. I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to first say thank you very much for everyone for sticking around.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. We do. Oh,
no, go ahead.
We do these every single week, same time, same place. And those watching the video, like, subscribe. You know the rest of the stuff you got to do so that it comes into your feed. And thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thanks for hosting us.